Thank you, Janet. It's a pleasure to have Chad with us today. First of all, Chad, can you talk about how it was being a very active child and being diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa?
Sure, Vance. First of all, I appreciate you having me on the show to talk about this. I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts. It was obviously very challenging as a young person growing up with the condition. I could see during the day okay. I played sports and even drove a car and was able to be very active during the day. And at night, I had a hard time seeing in the nighttime, as do a lot of people who are diagnosed with RP. But I think the hardest part, I think, was the idea that there was something looming, right? And I knew at some point they had told me that I could lose my eyesight. But when you're young and you're able to do most of the things that you want to do, and there aren't any obvious deterioration of your eyesight, you get a little complacent. And I was guilty of that. I was a little complacent and thought I was going to be fine. I was going to be an outlier, and my vision would probably last my whole life. And until that started to change in my late teens to early 20s, I thought everything was going to be okay. But then in my late teens, my vision did start to deteriorate. And that's when I realized that what they had warned me about was actually coming to fruition. And that was a tough spot, right? Coming to grips with the idea that whatever image I had of myself growing up was now going to have to change because of the circumstances.
Now, this was something that was not your fault, but I imagine trying to have a good attitude about it was difficult, and something that you mentioned is trying to tell yourself better stories. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely there was, as I was going through this, a sense of guilt and probably even embarrassment, right? Because it wasn't my fault, but it was still not what I didn't sign up for it. It wasn't something that I really, wanted to be when I grew up. A lot of people ask kids in school what they want to be when they grow up. Not a lot of people want to raise their hands and say, "Oh, I want to be a blind guy," right? That's just not high on the list. So for me, it was getting to a point to where I could visualize how I could make going blind look good. And until I could get to that point, the mental model that I had before that would not allow me to get to where I wanted to be in life. But once I started to think about the new way of consuming this new reality, the stories that I started telling myself. So, I could have very easily, for my entire life, could have chosen to tell myself a story of, well, Chad, you have really bad luck. And for a period, I did that. For a year or two, I did that. I was very grief-stricken, right? It was very difficult. I felt like I was mourning the loss of my identity. It wasn't what I had signed up for. And I was frankly in a very bad place for a year or two. And then I started to realize that it wasn't taking me to where I wanted to go. It was just a downward spiral. And so I started learning how to tell myself a better story. So instead of telling myself the story of, Chad, you went blind because you have really bad luck, I started telling myself a better story, a story of, well, Chad, maybe you went blind because you're one of the few people on the planet who can actually deal with this in a productive way, and you can actually overcome it and maybe even use it as a tool to reach and inspire people to navigate their challenges. And so that, for me, became my new vision of what I wanted to do with my situation, and a way for me to frame my reality in a way that was more productive. Because what I found throughout my own life is that ultimately we will all become the stories that we tell ourselves. So if you're not telling yourself a story that's productive and gets you where you want to go, you're kind of getting in your own way. And so for me, once I started learning to tell myself a much better story, it created a narrative in my mind, which became my words and then became my actions and eventually became my outcomes.
Chad, you chose to go to the hometown school there in Knoxville. So how was it for you losing your eyesight trying to use screen reading software? Was that a real challenge for you?
Yeah, it was at first, because before I went blind, I didn't know how to use a computer. And so I learned, because I was in college at the time, and so I'd used back in 98, 99, I'd used WordPerfect and things like that when I could see. But after I lost my eyesight, I went to Leader Dogs for the Blind in Rochester Hills, Michigan, and that's where I saw one of my classmates there using JAWS on a computer. And I didn't know, he had even said something like, I'm going to go down the hall and check my email. And I thought, what's he talking about going to check his email? Is he crazy? I mean, has anyone told him that he's blind? But he was using JAWS, and I just simply didn't know about JAWS. And so coming back from that experience in Michigan back to the University of Tennessee, I started to learn about JAWS, started to investigate that technology, and then started to apply it to my learnings at the university. Now, back in '98, we don't have the amount of electronic information that we have available today, so the books were not electronically available and things like that. But certainly, I saw that this could be a great portal to the world with the introduction of the internet and the way things are getting digitized, and the amount of opportunity that the computer unlocked. And so it was very challenging to get familiar with that, but I was really thrown into the deep end because not long after coming back to the university from learning that JAWS existed, I was thrown into a management information systems class where we had to learn Excel and Access and PowerPoint and all of those things. And then within another year and a half, I'm working for a major consulting company to where I'm actually expected to write code to program enterprise applications. So it was very much sink or swim type of environment.
Chad, you talk about getting out of your comfort zone and trying to face obstacles and learning from those experiences. So how was it for you as one who is blind to actually go to Harvard Business School?
Yeah, I think it was definitely a great experience. They were fantastic there. I think the biggest obstacle for me was me, to be very honest with you, because at the time, I was working in corporate America, and the employer I was with at the time, they were great, and I had my decisions at the time. I was leading pricing and deal strategy, and so my decisions had brought in over $45 billion in contracts, and they came to me and said, listen, you've done a lot for the company. What can we do for you? And so I thought about it over a week or so and came back and said, I'd like you to send me to this Harvard program. And, they agreed. And the really scary thing about that was, well, I'd really kind of put myself out there. What if I don't get in? And then initially it was, well, what if the company doesn't approve? And so my own fears almost prevented that amazing experience from ever happening. And so the thing that I always come to is a lot of times the fear is really in our minds. And if we can get beyond the fear, then we'll find much more fulfillment than we think is possible or that we know is possible. I ended up getting sponsorship for my company, getting into the program, was eventually elected as the graduating speaker. And because of that, it's changed actually the trajectory of my life, because now I'm very motivated and I realize that I have the opportunity to help people in a real deep and meaningful way by taking advantage of the story that I've got to just help people think differently about change and how to overcome adversity and how to navigate the twists and turns that life throws our way.
So how are you able to develop software that Oracle thought was impossible?
I'd been working, as I mentioned, I worked for a technology company out of college, and I'd worked with some folks at the time this was Accenture, Anderson Consulting, when I first started working there. It's before they'd gone public. And I'd moved on, from that. I was living in the Washington, D.C. area, and a friend of mine from Accenture had called me and said they had a customer with a blind employee who was unable to do his job because of a problem between their customer relationship management software and the screen reading software for the blind, JAWS. And so he had asked me if I could take a look at it, and I did. I looked at it, figured out a way to integrate this particular CRM application with JAWS, and it involved working with their ActiveX plugin and what's going on inside of the browser. It was a thin client environment. And so not really knowing any better, I just assumed it was like any other application that needed to be integrated. And so I went in, and over the course of a couple of months, I did that. I wrote the code and integrated it and got the employee up and running, and he was doing his job. When about a year or two later, I get an email from one of these public listservs that asks about using JAWS with this particular CRM product. And so I responded and said, yeah, I've done this before. I can probably help you out. And so they get on the call with their Oracle technical account manager and me and the manufacturer of the screen reading technology. And I had also brought along with me the customer I'd done this for and their blind employee. When everybody there on the call says, we're curious to hear, how you did this because we don't think that it could be done. And then I literally had my customer there who had been using this program for the last 12 to 18 months doing their job. And so that was obviously a point to where they realized that, in fact, that it could be done. And from that point forward, they started referring business my way, Oracle did. But it's an interesting dynamic because had I known that they were saying that it wasn't possible, maybe I wouldn't have tried it, right? Maybe it would have biased me to not actually try it. But because I didn't have that bias, I actually just attempted it and figured out a way to do it. So it was a pretty fun experience.
Chad, you currently work at Red Hat. What kind of operation is Red Hat?
So at Red Hat, we're an open source software company. So we have a very interesting business model. If you think about, I always like to say, we sell free stuff because open source software is freely developed in the open source community. So if you think about most traditional software vendors, they have a team of engineers, and these engineers write all the code, and it's proprietary, and it's their intellectual property, and then they'll package that and then deliver it in a software form and a product to their customers. Well, at Red Hat, we operate very differently. We actually use open source software development. And if you think about a bottle of water is a really good example of this. Water is free. So why do we all pay for a bottle of water? Well, we pay for a bottle of water because someone goes out and they locate the water and they scoop it up out of a mountain spring. They then sanitize that water and then clean it and package it in an easy-to-consume container that they deliver to our local convenience. Well, at Red Hat, we do the same thing, but with software code. We go out and we locate the open-source software code that's freely developed in the open-source community. We then scoop that up and sanitize it and package it and make it safe for the enterprise to consume. We then package that and deliver it to our customers. So we're able to collect all of the ideas from millions of software engineers around the world for free and make money by helping our customers keep their services running. So our customers don't pay us for the ideas, they pay us for the stability that we bring to their technology. So it's kind of like it's crowdsourced innovation. So we figured out a way to harness the innovation of 23 million plus software engineers around the world and monetize that by bringing stability to our customers' enterprise and mission-critical workloads.
Chad, you mentioned that you were very active before you lost your eyesight, but our listeners may be interested to know that you're an avid downhill skier now. How is it that you're able to do that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't even know it was possible until a few years ago. I had never skied before, and a few years back, a friend of mine told me about a program called Challenge Aspen, and there are a few others. I've since skied at the National Ability Center as well in Park City, Utah, and Challenge Aspen is obviously in Aspen, Colorado. And what they'll do is someone will ski behind me, and I'm wearing an earpiece and a mic and my helmet, and they will tell me which direction to go. Now, obviously, not having ever put on a pair of skis before, it was a little bit of a learning curve, but now I'm to the point to where, I can get on some pretty aggressive slopes. Last year the year before started getting into some pretty steep terrain and getting into some of these black diamonds that are out there, which is a lot of fun. And one of the things that I didn't realize until the first time I had skied was, as a blind person, we're often tethered to a cane or a dog or a person or whatever the case may be. But on the mountain, you're literally not tethered to anything. So it's a very liberating and thrilling feeling. One of the best feelings that I know of personally, and it's actually pretty addictive. So I try to go as often as I can. It's amazing the feeling you get on the slopes. And honestly, if I could see where I was going, it might be a little boring. It definitely adds a new wrinkle to it, not being able to see what's in front of you. And honestly, just to add to that, takes a lot of the preconceived notions that sighted people have when they ski. They oftentimes get a little trepidatious about what's in front of them. So they're looking down the mountain at 13,000 feet, and it scares most of them. A lot of people are very scared when they look downhill, and the information that their eyes are telling them prevents them from actually doing what they need to be doing to get down the mountain. So in this case, it's actually a bit of an advantage because I don't get biased by what my eyes are telling me, so I'm actually able to execute what the guide is telling me to do more effectively.
Chad, how can our listeners get more information about you?
Yeah, they can follow me on Twitter at Chad E. Foster. They can go to my website at chadefoster.com. I'm on Facebook, find Chad E. Foster. I'm also on Instagram, find Chad E. Foster. So all of those are great ways to keep in touch with me and what's going on.
Thank you so much. We've been speaking with Knoxville native Chad Foster, who is Senior Director of Worldwide Deal Management at Red Hat. This is Eye on Vision.